I walked into that ICU room at St. David's Medical Center expecting to surprise my son Michael with his favorite homemade chocolate chip cookies, still warm from the oven. The familiar, comforting scent of melted chocolate and brown sugar filled the sterile hallway, a stark contrast to the antiseptic smell that hit me like a wall the moment the automatic doors hissed open. I was picturing his smile, the way his eyes would light up like they did when he was a little boy. Instead, I found him unconscious. The sight stole the air from my lungs. My boy, my strong 42-year-old son, was a pale imitation of himself, lost in a sea of white sheets and dwarfed by the towers of humming beeping machines that stood guard over his fragile life. A tangle of wires snaked across his chest, and a clear tube disappeared into his mouth, forcing air into lungs that had betrayed him. A massive heart attack, the charge nurse had explained in the hallway, her voice a gentle murmur of practiced sympathy. The words didn't seem real. Heart attacks were for old men, for people who hadn't taken care of themselves, not for my Michael, who ran marathons and was the pillar of his family. My gaze frantically scanned the room, desperately searching for his wife, Chloe. She should have been in the worn-out vinyl chair by his bedside, her hand clutching his, her presence a silent vigil. But the chair was empty. It sat there cold and stark, a testament to an absence so profound it felt like a physical presence in the room. Where was she? Where was the woman who had vowed, in front of God and 200 witnesses, to love him in sickness and in health? The head nurse, a kind woman with weary eyes named Brenda, approached me as if I were a frightened animal. "We've been trying to reach his wife for hours, Mrs. Miller," she said, her voice a soft whisper that barely disturbed the mechanical symphony of the ICU. "Her phone goes straight to voicemail. We've left several messages." Voicemail. My son is fighting for every single breath he takes, and his wife, his partner in life, can't be bothered to answer her phone. A cold dread, sharp and ugly, began to seep into the cracks of my breaking heart. "He was at his desk when it happened," Brenda continued, her professionalism a thin veil over her empathy. "His assistant found him. He had his phone with him when the paramedics brought him in." She handed me Michael's smartphone, sealed in a clear plastic biohazard bag. "Maybe you can find another contact number for her. A sister or a friend we could try?" I nodded numbly, my hands fumbling with the seal. My mind was a chaotic fog of worst-case scenarios. Maybe she'd been in an accident too. Maybe her phone was dead. There had to be a reason, a logical explanation for her vanishing act. There had to be. I finally got the phone out. My thumbprint, which Michael had added years ago just in case, easily granted me access to his life. The screen lit up, blinding me for a second. And there it was. Not a string of missed calls from a frantic, worried wife. Not a desperate text message saying she was on her way to the hospital. No. The most recent notification on his screen was from Instagram. A new story posted just 20 minutes ago by Chloe Miller _living life. My finger, trembling with a sudden inexplicable fear, tapped on the colorful circle around her profile picture. The screen filled with a scene so jarring, so utterly wrong, that my mind struggled to comprehend it. It was a world away from this cold, sterile room. A world of brilliant sunshine, impossibly turquoise water and powdery white sand. And there was Chloe. The cookies I was holding slipped from my numb grasp, the plastic container clattering onto the cold linoleum floor. The warmth I had so lovingly baked into them just hours ago felt like a cruel mocking joke in the face of the absolute ice that was now flooding my veins. The nurse handed me his phone, and what I saw on the screen made my blood run cold. It wasn't a message from his loving wife. It was an Instagram story. I couldn't breathe. It felt as if one of the machines hooked up to Michael was now hooked up to me, squeezing my lungs, stealing my air. On the small bright screen, Chloe was laughing. It was a full-throated, head-thrown-back laugh of pure, unadulterated joy. Her expensive blonde hair, the kind that costs a fortune to maintain, was whipping in a tropical ocean breeze. She was wearing a tiny bikini that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill, and she was raising a champagne flute in a toast. Her arm was linked with a handsome, muscular man, tanned and smiling, who was most definitely not my son. They were on a pristine beach under a thatched-roof cabana, the very picture of romantic bliss. The caption, written in a bubbly pink font that seemed to mock my grief, read, "Living our best life in Cabo. #getaway, #paradise, #couple goals." Couple goals. The words were a physical blow, knocking the last bit of hope from my heart. My thumb moved with a will of its own, tapping through the rest of her story. Each image was a fresh stab, twisting the knife of her betrayal deeper. There was Chloe posing seductively on the bow of a sleek white yacht, the ocean stretching out behind her. There she was, feeding a chocolate-covered strawberry to her companion at a candlelit dinner on the beach, their feet bare in the sand. And then there was a video. I could hear the gentle crash of waves and the faint sound of salsa music as she giggled, filming the chiseled jawline of the man beside her. He turned and kissed her, a long, passionate kiss that was meant for my son, and my son alone. "Isn't Trent just the best tour guide?" she cooed to the camera, her voice thick with adoration. Trent. So the Viper had a name. He looked like he'd been sculpted from marble, every muscle perfectly defined, his smile a flash of predatory white teeth. He was the kind of man you saw on the cover of a fitness magazine, not the kind of man who should be on a romantic getaway with my son's wife while my son lay clinging to life. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the edge of Michael's bed to steady myself. How long? How long had this been going on? How many times had she sat at our family dinner table, smiling and chatting about her day, all while carrying this ugly secret? The late nights at the office, the weekend trips with the girls, the sudden obsession with a new exclusive gym across town, it all clicked into place, each lie a puzzle piece in a sickening masterpiece of deceit. The grief I felt just moments before didn't disappear. It was still there, a heavy aching stone in my chest, but now it was surrounded by something else. Something hot and alive and dangerous. It morphed and twisted into a cold, calculated rage. Chloe wasn't just an absent wife. She was a traitor. She wasn't just disrespecting her marriage vows. She was dancing on the edge of my son's grave. And she was doing it using his money. All of his hard work, all of his sacrifices, all the 12-hour days that had probably contributed to the strain on his heart. It was all funding her paradise with another man. No. Not on my watch. This wasn't a private marital issue anymore. This was a declaration of war. She had abandoned her post. And in doing so, she had left the gate wide open for me. I was his mother. I was there for his first breath, and I would be damned if I wasn't going to be there to protect him now. If you're just joining my story, thank you for being here. It means the world to me. Before I tell you what I did next, I'd love it if you hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what city, or even what country you're listening from. It helps me feel a little less alone in all this. What time is it where you are? Here in this moment, in this cold, quiet room, time had completely stopped. I was about to make her five-star paradise feel like a very small, very cold cage. With a newfound sense of purpose, I opened my own banking app on my phone. A few years ago, after a health scare of my own, Michael had insisted on adding my name to his main checking and credit card accounts. "It's just for emergencies, Mom," he'd said, brushing off my protests. "A failsafe. You never know when you might need it." He had no idea how right he was. The bitter irony of his foresight was not lost on me. He had given me the very weapon I now needed to protect him. The transaction history loaded, and it was a sickening roadmap of Chloe's deceit. The numbers scrolled past my eyes, each one a testament to her greed. A $1,200 a night charge for a beachfront villa at the Gilded Palm Resort in Spa in Cabo. Over $8,000 for 2 first-class tickets on American Airlines. A charge for $3,500 at a Gucci boutique in the resort's promenade. Another for $2,800 at a high-end jewelry store called Cabo Jewels. It was a staggering amount of money spent in just under 48 hours. She wasn't just having a vacation. She was systematically trying to drain him dry before. Before what? The thought was too dark to complete. My blood, which had been running cold, now boiled. This wasn't just reckless spending. This was a brazen, heartless plundering of the life my son had built, brick by painful brick. I navigated to the account management section, my heart pounding a steady rhythm of pure adrenaline. I saw the list of authorized cards, Michael's primary card, and 3 supplementary cards under the name Chloe Miller. One for everyday purchases, one for travel, one for business expenses. She had all her bases covered. One by one, I selected each of Chloe's cards. A small, innocent-looking button appeared next to each one. Freeze card. With 3 deliberate, satisfying taps, I pressed it. A confirmation popped up each time. Card frozen. All future transactions will be declined. I imagined her at a fancy restaurant, her face a mask of indignation as the waiter returned with her declined card. The thought brought a grim smile to my face. I wasn't done. I went to their joint checking account and did the same for her debit card. Then, for good measure, I navigated to the security settings and changed the online banking password to a random string of letters and numbers that not even a supercomputer could guess. In the space of 60 seconds, I had cut off her entire financial lifeline. But that was just damage control. Now I needed ammunition. I scrolled through my contacts and found the name. Diane. My best friend of 40 years. After a nasty divorce that left her with nothing but a broken heart and a thirst for justice, she'd gone back to school and become one of the sharpest private investigators in Texas. She was retired now, content to spend her days gardening and spoiling her grandkids, but I knew the fire was still there. Diane, I said the moment she answered, my voice low and steady. I need your help. It's Michael. I laid it all out in short, clipped sentences. The ICU. The heart attack. Chloe in Cabo with a man named Trent. Diane didn't interrupt with condolences or questions. She just listened, the silence on her end a comforting presence. I'm on it, Susan, she said finally, her voice all business. Don't you worry. I'll find out who this Trent character is and get you everything I can. You just stay with your boy. I'll handle the rest. I mean, what would you have done in my shoes? If you discovered such a deep betrayal while your child's life was hanging by a thread? Let me know in the comments. I felt like I was moving on pure raw instinct, and I truly need to know if I was doing the right thing. I hung up, a small sliver of control cutting through the chaos in my heart. I sat back in that uncomfortable hospital chair, holding my unconscious son's hand, and I started a timer on my phone. I was giving her 1 hour. 1 hour until her world of champagne and sunshine came crashing down around her. And I was going to enjoy every single second of it. The phone rang in exactly 47 minutes. I had been timing it, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of Michael's chest, each mechanical breath from the ventilator a painful metronome counting down to this moment. The caller ID flashed Chloe's name, accompanied by the picture she'd chosen. A professionally shot photo of her and Michael, both smiling, the perfect image of a happy couple. The hypocrisy made me sick. I let it ring 3 times, imagining her growing panic, before I swiped to answer. Susan. Her voice was tight, the usual breezy, confident tone replaced by a sharp edge of controlled panic. Thank God you answered. There seems to be some problem with the cards. Everything's being declined. We were just trying to pay for dinner. And it was so embarrassing. I took a slow, deliberate breath, channeling every ounce of fake, grandmotherly concern I could muster. Oh dear. How inconvenient for you. That sounds terribly embarrassing. I paused, letting the silence stretch, forcing her to be the one to fill it. I can only imagine. Where did you say you were again? A longer pause this time. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, the frantic search for a plausible lie that fit the new circumstances. I'm at a spa retreat, she stammered, the lie sounding flimsy even to my own ears. For my anxiety. You know how worried I get about Michael's work stress. It's just been so overwhelming. A spa retreat, I repeated slowly, as if savoring the absurdity of it. How lovely for you. And where is this wonderful retreat? I'm always looking for new places to recommend to the ladies at my book club. It's very exclusive, she said quickly, her voice a little too high-pitched. You probably wouldn't have heard of it. It's in Scottsdale, Arizona. Try me, I said, my voice as sweet as poison. I'm more worldly than you give me credit for, Chloe. What's the name of the resort? I watched a nurse come in to check Michael's drip. My calm exterior a perfect mask for the storm raging inside me. This woman was casually lying about being in another state while my son lay here, possibly dying. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it was something to behold. The silence on her end of the line was so profound this time that I actually wondered if the call had dropped. Then her tone shifted. The flimsy pretense was gone, vaporized in an instant, replaced by the pure, undiluted venom of a cornered animal. Susan, what is this really about? I know you did this. Why are the accounts frozen? I allowed myself a small, cold smile. Well, darling, I said, throwing her favorite condescending endearment right back at her like a grenade. It's funny you should ask. When I arrived at the hospital and found my only son unconscious and alone, with absolutely no idea where his loving wife might be, I thought it was prudent to secure his financial assets. You understand, medical bills can be so expensive, and we wouldn't want his money being wasted on non-essentials. You had no right, she shrieked, the panic now fully laced with impotent fury. Actually, Chloe, I had every right, I replied, my voice dropping to a calm, icy level that could freeze fire. That's the funny thing about being a co-signer and an emergency contact on a joint account. It means that in a verifiable medical emergency involving the primary account holder, I can do whatever I deem necessary to protect his interests. And let's be honest, spending $12,000 in 2 days on a luxury vacation in Cabo San Lucas with your personal trainer doesn't exactly scream in his best interest. Now does it? Dead silence. The only sound was her sharp, ragged intake of breath. I knew in that moment that she realized I knew everything. Not just that she was away, but where she was, who she was with, and what she had been doing. The game was over. You've always been jealous of me, she finally hissed, a pathetic last-ditch effort to wound me. I almost laughed. Oh, Chloe, I don't feel jealousy. I feel pity. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to get back to what actually matters, taking care of my son. And with that, I hung up, leaving her stranded in her tropical paradise with nothing but her lies, her lover, and the dawning terrifying realization that her gravy train had just hit a concrete wall at 100 miles per hour. Just as the adrenaline from my verbal duel with Chloe began to fade, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from Diane. I answered immediately, my heart thumping with a mixture of dread and anticipation. Okay, Susan, I have some initial information for you, Diane said, her voice stripped of all warmth, all business. And I'm going to be blunt. You're not going to like it. I don't like any of this, Diane, I said, my voice weary. Just tell me what you've found. His name is Trent Becker, age 35. He's a personal trainer at Elysian Fitness, one of those high-end gyms in downtown Austin where membership costs a fortune. According to his employment records, Chloe has been a client of his for the last 8 months. 8 months. The number hit me like a physical blow. That was the same time she'd started her transformation. The new diet, the obsessive workouts, the endless talk about wellness and self-care. It hadn't been about health. It had been about him. The trip was booked over a month ago, Diane continued, each word a hammer blow to my crumbling image of my son's marriage. First-class tickets, the works. It was planned as a 10-day trip. She wasn't coming home anytime this week, Susan. 10 days. She had planned to be gone for 10 days while my son was working himself into an early grave to pay for the very life she was flaunting with another man. But there's more, Diane said, and her voice dropped lower, taking on a grim, serious tone that made the hairs on my arms stand up. This Trent character, he's not just a pretty face with a nice set of abs, Susan. I ran a preliminary background check through a friend who still has access to the good databases. He has a record. A chill, colder than the air-conditioned ICU, snaked down my spine. A record? What kind of record? Is he violent? Not officially, not yet anyway, Diane said. But the pattern is disturbing. He has 2 arrests for fraud, both in Florida about 5 years ago. The charges were eventually dropped in both cases, but the circumstances are almost identical. He was romantically involved with 2 recently widowed, very wealthy women. Both women accused him of coercing them into signing over large sums of money, transferring property deeds, things like that. They both claimed he was charming and wonderful until he got what he wanted, and then he turned cold and manipulative. The cases fell apart because it became a he said, she said situation, but the pattern is there. My hand flew to my mouth. This wasn't just some sleazy affair. This man was a professional, a predator who hunted for a specific type of prey. What are you saying, Diane? I whispered, my voice hoarse. I'm saying this guy smells like a black widow spider, Susan. He targets vulnerable women with access to money. And right now, with Michael incapacitated in the hospital, Chloe fits that profile perfectly. She has access to Michael's considerable assets, his power of attorney. Diane's words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. My fight with Chloe suddenly seemed so petty, so insignificant. In the face of this new terrifying possibility, was Chloe a willing accomplice in some grand scheme, or was she just another foolish, greedy woman who had been ensnared by a professional con man? At this point, I wasn't sure it mattered. She had brought this viper into our family, and now we were all at risk. I felt a new kind of fear, one that was colder and deeper than my anger. This wasn't just about protecting Michael's money anymore. This might be about protecting his very life. "Keep digging, Diane," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Dig up everything you can on him. I want to know where he breathes." I hung up the phone, my mind racing. This was a tangled, ugly web of deceit, and we were caught right in the middle of it. The situation was spiraling out of my control, getting darker and more dangerous by the minute. Just as I was trying to process this terrifying new information, the door to the ICU room opened. A doctor in a white coat walked in, a cautious, weary smile on his face. He looked at me, then at Michael. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice gentle, "I have some good news. Your son is awake." It felt as if the entire world, which had been gray and muted, suddenly snapped back into color. The oppressive weight on my chest lifted, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I could take a full, deep breath. "He's awake," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. I rushed to Michael's bedside. His eyes were open, fluttering slowly, clouded with confusion but undeniably alert. He scanned the room, his gaze lingering on the blinking machines before finally landing on me. A wave of pure, unadulterated relief washed over his face, erasing some of the pain and confusion. "Mom," he rasped, his voice rough and scratchy from the breathing tube that had been removed just an hour earlier. "I'm here, sweetheart," I said, my voice thick with unshed tears as I took his hand. It felt warm, alive. "I'm right here. You gave us all quite a scare, you know that." He managed a weak squeeze, his eyes darting around the room again. I saw the moment the fog of medication began to clear, replaced by a dawning, painful reality. He was in a hospital. He was weak. Something was terribly wrong. His eyes widened slightly. Where's Chloe?" My heart, which had just started to mend itself, fractured all over again. How could I do this? How could I tell my son, in his most vulnerable state, that the love of his life, the mother of his children, was not here? How could I deliver a blow like that when his recovery depended entirely on staying calm and stress-free? She's traveling, honey." I began, the lie feeling like ash in my mouth. There was a mix-up with the dates. She couldn't get a flight back. His brow furrowed, a line of confusion creasing his forehead. "Traveling? But we didn't have any plans. We were supposed to have dinner with the Hendersons tonight." He struggled to sit up, hissing in pain as the wires on his chest pulled taut. "I don't remember. The last thing I remember is being at the office. My chest felt like it was in a vice." "You collapsed at work on Thursday afternoon," I explained gently, trying to fill in the blanks for him. "It's Saturday morning now. You've been unconscious for almost 2 days." The confusion in his eyes was heartbreaking. He was a man who was always in control, a lawyer who remembered every detail, and now he had a 48-hour black hole in his life, a life he had almost lost. "But Chloe, she would have been here," he murmured, his gaze falling on the simple bouquet of yellow roses I'd brought from my garden, the only splash of color in the sterile room. "She would have called. She would have." He trailed off, a flicker of doubt, of suspicion, crossing his face for the first time. He was too smart. He knew something was wrong. He looked directly at me, his gaze clear and pleading. "Mom, where is my wife?" Before I could force another lie past my lips, my phone, which I still held clutched in my hand like a lifeline, began to ring. Chloe's name and smiling face flashed across the screen. Michael's eyes locked onto it instantly. "That's her," he said, a hopeful look on his face that nearly shattered me into pieces. "Answer it, please. I need to hear her voice." I looked at my son's desperate, hopeful face. Then I thought of the pictures of her in Cabo, laughing without a care in the world. I thought about what Diane had told me about the predator she was with. In that moment I made a decision. He deserved the truth. He was a fighter, my son. He was stronger than any of us knew. He could handle it. I answered the call, and before he could object, I pressed the speakerphone button, holding the phone so he could hear everything. "Susan, thank God." Chloe's voice, dripping with fake frantic drama, filled the quiet room. I've been trying to reach you all night. How is Michael? The hospital won't tell me anything because of privacy laws, and I'm trying to get a flight back, but everything's booked solid. Slow down, Chloe, I said, my voice a mask of calm. Michael is awake. He's stable. And he can hear you. A beat of stunned silence. Then her voice pitched higher, becoming a caricature of a concerned wife. Michael? Baby. Oh, thank God. I'm so sorry I'm not there. I'm stuck in this horrible place. It's so remote. There's no connectivity, and I just found out about your accident. Michael's eyes narrowed slightly, the lawyer in him awakening, analyzing every word, every nuance. Chloe, he said quietly, his voice surprisingly strong. What horrible place are you stuck in? I thought you told me you were going to that yoga retreat in Phoenix. I watched my daughter-in-law's carefully constructed world of lies begin to wobble on its foundations, right there through a hospital room speakerphone. And I knew that sometimes, the truth doesn't need to be delivered gently. Sometimes it needs to arrive like a freight train, fast and loud and impossible to ignore. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. It stretched for what felt like a full minute. I could practically hear the frantic whirring of Chloe's mind as she tried to weave a new lie to patch the gaping hole in her old one. The retreat moved, she finally stammered, the words tumbling out in a rush. It's a traveling wellness program. A last-minute change of plans. The new location is very remote. In the mountains. That's why the connectivity is so bad. But Michael wasn't listening to her excuses anymore. His gaze had shifted from the phone to me, his eyes sharp and questioning. He knew. He could tell from my expression, from the way I held the phone, that there was a deeper, uglier truth lurking beneath her flimsy lies. I gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent confirmation of his suspicions. It was all he needed. Mom, he said, his voice firm and clear, after I'd finally had enough and hung up on Chloe's increasingly desperate and nonsensical explanations. Tell me everything. What aren't you telling me? I took a deep breath, steeling myself. He deserved the unvarnished truth. Your wife is not at a yoga retreat, Michael, I said, my voice quiet but steady. She's in Cabo San Lucas. She has been for 3 days. Since before your heart attack. She's with a man named Trent Becker. He closed his eyes and for a terrifying moment, his heart monitor let out a series of rapid, urgent beeps. I instinctively reached for the nurse's call button. Don't, he said quietly, opening his eyes again. There was no shock in them. Only a profound, weary sadness that seemed to age him by a decade. I'm not surprised, Mom. He let out a shaky breath. Disappointed but not surprised. That stopped me cold. What do you mean you're not surprised? A bitter, humorless laugh escaped his lips, turning into a painful cough that shook his entire body. I've known something was off for months, Mom. The secretive phone call she'd take in the other room, the new designer clothes she'd hide at the back of the closet, the sudden obsession with fitness that had her out of the house for hours at a time, at all hours of the day. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the full weight of the emotional burden he'd been carrying alone. Mom, I hired a private investigator 6 weeks ago. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. My brilliant, perceptive son had been one step ahead of me all along. He hadn't been blind to her betrayal. He had been methodically, quietly gathering evidence. He had been protecting himself. And? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Trent Becker, he said, the name sounding like acid on his tongue. Personal trainer. They've been having an affair for the better part of 8 months. He said it so matter-of-factly, his voice devoid of emotion, like he was discussing a legal case and not the complete implosion of his 10-year marriage. What I didn't know, he added, his voice turning to ice, was that she'd take a vacation with him while I was dying. We sat in silence for a long moment, the steady rhythmic beep of the heart monitor the only sound in the room. My son wasn't just a victim. He was a strategist. The lawyer in him had taken over where the husband had been betrayed. So you froze the accounts, he said suddenly, a slow, tired smile spreading across his face. It was the first real smile I'd seen since he'd woken up. While she's in Mexico. Mom, you are a magnificent woman. He actually started to laugh then, a real genuine laugh despite the pain it clearly caused him. So she's stuck there? With him? With no money? Her credit cards, debit cards, all access to your accounts. Completely and utterly frozen. I confirmed, a matching smile touching my own lips. He was quiet for a long moment, his legal mind clearly working through the new implications, the new leverage this unexpected turn of events gave him. Mom, he said finally, his voice now sharp and focused, the weariness replaced by a steely resolve. I need you to do something for me. I need you to call my lawyer, Jessica Martinez. Tell her it's time to move forward with the divorce papers we've been preparing. And tell her the situation has evolved. Evolved how? I asked. His smile turned cold, and in that moment, I saw the formidable, undefeated attorney who had built a successful practice by always being 3 steps ahead of his opponents. Because, he said, abandonment during a medical emergency, blatant adultery, and massive financial irresponsibility are going to make this divorce very, very one-sided in my favor. Just as I pulled up Jessica Martinez's contact information in my phone, ready to make the call that would officially begin the end of my son's marriage, Michael's phone, which was still on the bedside table, began to ring again. It wasn't Chloe this time. It was an unknown number with a local 512 Austin area code. Don't answer it, I said immediately, a protective instinct flaring up like a shield. It could be anyone. You need to rest. No, Michael said, his eyes narrowing in thought as he stared at the screen. Answer it. Put it on speaker. Something tells me this is related. I have a feeling our friend Trent is getting nervous. I hesitated for a second, my heart pounding with a new kind of anxiety, but I trusted my son's instincts. I swiped to answer and placed the phone on the table between us. Hello, I said, my voice cautious and neutral. A man's voice, smooth and confident, almost like a radio DJ, came through the speaker. It was dripping with a practiced, superficial charm. Hi, yes, is this the ICU at St. David's Medical Center? My name is Robert Peterson. I'm a close family friend, and I'm calling from out of town to check on the condition of one of your patients, Michael Miller. I heard he had a bit of a health scare. My blood ran cold. It was him. It was Trent. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of this man, to call the hospital himself using a fake name, was staggering. Michael's eyes widened, and he immediately put a finger to his lips, signaling for me to play along, to see what he was after. I'm sorry, sir, I said, pitching my voice to sound like a tired, overworked hospital administrator. I injected every ounce of practiced, bureaucratic formality I could muster. Patient information is strictly confidential due to HIPAA regulations. I can't confirm or deny that we have a patient by that name. Oh, of course, I completely understand HIPAA and all that, he said with a slick, dismissive chuckle that made my skin crawl. I'm just terribly worried. You see, I'm a very close friend of his wife, Chloe. She's currently at a silent meditation retreat and is completely unreachable, poor thing, and I promised her I'd be the one to check in for her. Could you just tell me, is his condition stable? Is the prognosis positive? The way he paused before the word positive sent a shiver of pure ice down my spine. This wasn't the call of a concerned friend. This was a predator sniffing around the edges of a potential kill. He was fishing. He was conducting reconnaissance. He wanted to know in no uncertain terms if my son was going to live or die. Michael's face was a mask of cold fury. He scribbled a note on the pad next to his bed and held it up for me to see. It read, "He's assessing his risk. And ours." Sir, I said, my voice now as cold as a morgue slab. As I said, I cannot release any information about any patient over the phone. We will only speak with the patient's legal next of kin. And you are not on the approved contact list. There was a pause, and for a moment I thought he'd give up. But then he pressed on, his voice losing some of its silky smoothness, a hint of irritation creeping in. Look, can you just have a doctor call me back at this number? It's very important. I need to know if I should be making arrangements. What kind of arrangements? I snapped, my composure cracking for a second under the weight of his ghoulish implication. Travel arrangements, of course, he said quickly, recovering his poise with practiced ease. To come and offer my support to the family. That won't be necessary, I said, my voice flat and final. Goodbye. I ended the call, my hand shaking with a mixture of rage and a fear so profound it left me breathless. We both sat in stunned silence, the echo of his predatory voice hanging in the air between us. He's not just an affair, Michael whispered, his face pale, his breathing shallow. This is something else entirely. He's calculating. He wanted to know what his financial exposure was, whether the gravy train was about to end, or if he needed a new plan. The casual cruelty of it all, the cold-blooded assessment while my son lay helpless and fighting for his life, was more terrifying than any shouting match with Chloe could ever be. That's when I realized this wasn't just about money or a broken heart anymore. This felt dark. Incredibly, terrifyingly dark. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that we had to move faster than we'd ever imagined. 2 hours later, Jessica Martinez walked into the ICU room, and it felt like the cavalry had arrived. She was a petite woman, but she carried herself with an authority that filled the small room. She was dressed in a sharp, tailored suit, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, and her gaze was as sharp and focused as a laser. She greeted Michael warmly, a brief flicker of genuine concern in her eyes, before her entire demeanor shifted into a state of professional efficiency that I found both terrifying and incredibly reassuring. "Michael, it's good to see you awake," she said, setting her expensive-looking leather briefcase down on the small table by the window. "Your mother filled me in on the basics over the phone. I have the preliminary divorce filings ready to go, based on what we discussed last month regarding the emotional neglect." "Throw them out, Jessica," Michael said, his voice gaining strength with every passing hour. "We have a new situation. A much, much stronger one." We spent the next 30 minutes laying it all out for her. A tag team of mother and son united in a single purpose. We told her everything. Chloe's sudden trip to Cabo, the mountain of exorbitant charges on the credit cards, the affair with Trent Becker, the damning speakerphone call filled with lies, and finally Trent's audacious information-gathering call to the hospital just an hour before. Jessica listened intently, her pen flying across a legal pad, taking meticulous notes without a single wasted motion. She didn't interrupt, she didn't react. She just absorbed the information, her expression becoming grimmer with each new detail. When we finished, she tapped her pen on her pad for a long silent moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. "The abandonment during a medical crisis is a powerful tool for us, Michael," she said finally, her voice precise and analytical. "It paints a very clear and unsympathetic picture of spousal neglect and dereliction of duty. It will be extremely beneficial in family court, especially when it comes to the custody arrangements for Lily and Noah. No judge wants to see children placed with a mother who disappears during a family emergency." "There's more," I interjected, pulling out my phone. "My friend Diane, the PI, she found something on Trent. It's not good." I relayed everything Diane had told me about his history of fraud arrests in Florida, and his disturbing pattern of targeting wealthy, vulnerable women. Jessica's eyebrows shot up, her professional mask cracking for just a second. "That changes the landscape significantly," she said, her tone shifting from that of a divorce lawyer to something far more serious. "That moves this from a messy divorce into the realm of a potential criminal conspiracy. He isn't just an opportunistic boyfriend, he's a professional predator." She turned to me. "Susan, you said you downloaded the transaction histories before you froze the accounts?" "Yes, of course," I said, pulling up the files I had saved to my phone's home screen. She took my phone and began scrolling through the PDF statements, her eyes scanning line by line with an incredible speed and focus. She was silent for several minutes, the only sound in the room the steady beep of Michael's heart monitor. Then she stopped. She zoomed in on one section, her breath catching in a small, almost inaudible gasp. "Oh no," she whispered more to herself than to us. "What is it, Jessica?" Michael asked, trying to sit up, his own anxiety rising. "What did you find?" She turned the phone screen towards us, her finger pointing to a series of recurring transactions that I had completely overlooked in my anger. "This isn't just reckless spending," she said, her voice taut with a new dangerous urgency. "Look here. Over the past 6 months, a wire transfer every 2 weeks like clockwork for exactly $4,000. It's labeled International Consulting Fee." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I don't understand. What does that mean? The recipient isn't a company, Jessica explained, her finger tracing the line of cryptic text. It's a numbered bank account in the Cayman Islands. An anonymous offshore account that's notoriously difficult to trace. She did some quick math on her notepad. $4,000 twice a month for 6 months. That's $48,000. She's been systematically siphoning marital assets into an offshore account, hiding it where she thought no one would ever find it. She looked up, her eyes dark with the grim certainty of her conviction. And I would bet my law license that the account belongs to Mr. Trent Becker. I felt my jaw drop. This wasn't just a shopping spree fueled by greed. This was a calculated long-term plan to methodically drain their finances, to steal from her own family, hiding it right under our noses. This isn't just grounds for a one-sided divorce, Jessica said, snapping her briefcase shut with a decisive final click that echoed in the quiet room. This is felony fraud and criminal conspiracy. They weren't just planning a new life, they were planning a heist. And they were using your son's hard work and his trust to fund it. Jessica Martinez was a force of nature. In the hours that followed, she transformed that small corner of the ICU from a place of sickness and vulnerability into a legal command center. She made calls with a quiet, deadly efficiency that was both terrifying to behold and incredibly reassuring to have on our side. First, she explained, pacing by the window like a caged tigress, her phone pressed to her ear. We file for an emergency temporary restraining order, or TRO, against both Chloe and Trent. We'll cite the clear evidence of financial fraud, the emotional distress caused by the abandonment, and Trent's harassing call to the hospital, which we can subpoena the records for. A judge will sign off on that this afternoon. That will legally prevent them from contacting you, Michael, or the children, and from coming anywhere near the house, your office, or the kids' school. Next, with our permission, she made a call to a contact she had at the Austin Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. She laid out the situation with the offshore account, the systematic wire transfers, and Trent Becker's history of fraud in Florida. This is bigger than just a divorce now, she told us after she hung up. We're going to let the police handle the criminal investigation into the fraud. It will run parallel to our family court proceedings, and the existence of an active criminal investigation will give us tremendous leverage. She'll be facing potential jail time. That tends to make people very cooperative. While she worked her legal magic, my phone was buzzing incessantly with texts from Michael's sister, Karen, who had been an absolute saint, watching Lily and Noah since this whole nightmare began. Chloe just called me again, sobbing hysterically. Said Susan has lost her mind, is unstable, and has kidnapped her children. She said you need to let her speak to them immediately. Now she's threatening to call the police on me for gatekeeping and parental alienation. This woman is unbelievable. What on earth is going on? Call me when you can. I showed the messages to Jessica. She didn't even flinch. A small cold smile touched her lips. Let her, she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. It will only make our case for the restraining order stronger. It shows a pattern of harassment. Tell Karen not to engage. Do not respond. Save all the texts and record any voicemails. They are all evidence of her unstable and manipulative behavior. But Chloe wasn't done. About an hour later, as if on cue, Michael received an email. Not from Chloe, but from the managing partner at his prestigious law firm. Michael's face, which had been regaining some of its color, turned a shade of pale I didn't think was possible. He read the email, his hand trembling, and then passed the phone to Jessica without a single word. Jessica read the email aloud, her voice laced with a quiet, professional fury. It was a carefully worded, anonymous letter of concern, sent from a dummy email account. It detailed Michael's recent stress-induced breakdown and his sudden life-threatening health crisis. It went on to maliciously suggest that his notoriously unstable family situation, with a wife who was away dealing with her own personal crisis and 2 young children being cared for by an elderly, overwhelmed mother, made him a significant liability to the firm and its high-profile clients. It was a direct, vicious, and cowardly attack on his professional reputation and his very livelihood. She's trying to get him fired, I gasped, horrified at the depth of her cruelty. No, Jessica corrected, her eyes flashing with a dangerous light. She's trying to destroy him. She wants to leave him with no money, no job, and no credibility in court. This is a scorched earth strategy. She looked at Michael, whose face was a mask of utter betrayal. She has no idea who she's dealing with. Okay, I have to take a breath here. Can you even imagine the level of evil it takes to do something like that? To attack a man's career, his life's work, while he's lying in an ICU bed, all to gain an advantage in a divorce she caused? Stick with me, because the way we turned this despicable act against her is something you have to see to believe. We're going to use this, Jessica said, already forwarding the email to her own account and her forensic tech team. This anonymous letter, with its specific private details, sent while she is on vacation with her lover, is a perfect example of malicious intent. She just handed us the rope to hang herself with. Just then Jessica's phone rang. It was her private investigator. I've got something from the cloud backup of Chloe's laptop, the PI said. You're going to want to see this. Jessica listened, her eyes widening in disbelief. Send it over now, she said. She hung up and looked at us, her expression grim. It seems Chloe was planning more than just a heist. She was planning a complete disappearing act. 3 days later, Michael was finally discharged from the hospital. He was weak, moving slowly, and tethered to a heart monitor he had to wear for the next month, but he was home. The restraining orders had been granted by a judge who, according to Jessica, was appalled by the evidence. The locks on the house had been changed that morning. Karen had brought a tearful but happy Lily and Noah home from her house just an hour before Michael arrived. We had managed to shield them from the ugliest parts of the truth, telling them only that their mom was on a trip that had been extended, and that Daddy needed lots of quiet time to get better. A fragile, temporary peace had settled over the house. It was the calm before the inevitable storm. I was in the kitchen, carefully measuring out Michael's new cocktail of medications, when a taxi screeched to a halt in the driveway, its tires protesting on the pavement. My stomach plummeted into my shoes. Through the kitchen window I saw her. Chloe. She stumbled out of the cab, looking like she'd been through a war zone. Her expensive designer clothes were wrinkled and stained. Her perfect blonde hair was a tangled, greasy mess, and her face, stripped of its usual mask of makeup, was a canvas of pure, undiluted rage. Before I could even warn Michael, who was resting on the couch in the living room, she was pounding on the new front door, the heavy thuds echoing through the quiet house. Michael, let me in. I know you're in there. Open this door right now, she shrieked, her voice raspy and raw. I motioned for Karen, who was reading a book in the corner, to take the kids out to the back patio and put on some music. Go now, I whispered. She nodded, her eyes wide, and quickly ushered the bewildered children out the sliding glass door. I took a deep, steadying breath, smoothed down my apron, and walked to the front door. I opened it just enough to block her entry with my body. She pushed past me the second she saw the opening, stumbling into the foyer. Her wild eyes, bloodshot and frantic, scanned the living room. Where is he? Where are my children? She demanded, her voice a low, dangerous growl. Your children are safe, Chloe, I said, keeping my voice as even and calm as a frozen lake. Which is more than I can say for their father when you abandoned him to die. She whirled around, her eyes blazing with a desperate, cornered animal fury. I didn't abandon anyone. I was trapped in another country with no money because of you. You did this. You've always been a jealous old witch trying to turn Michael against me. I didn't have to do anything, Chloe. You did it all yourself, I said, refusing to raise my voice, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a fight. The affair, the stealing, the lies. That was all you. That money is mine too. This house is mine too, she screamed, her voice cracking. Not according to the prenuptial agreement you so eagerly signed, especially in cases of adultery and financial malfeasance. A new voice said, sharp and clear. We both turned. Jessica Martinez was standing in the archway to the dining room, holding a thick file, looking as cool and collected as if she were in a courtroom. She had insisted on being here for Michael's first day home, anticipating this exact scenario. Chloe's face went from red with rage to white with shock when she saw Jessica. Who the hell are you? She spat. I'm Michael's attorney, Jessica said coolly, taking a step forward. And I'm here to serve you with these. She held out a set of legal documents. This is a petition for divorce on the grounds of adultery and fraud, a motion for Michael to be granted sole and permanent custody of the children, and a copy of the permanent restraining order that legally prohibits you from being within 500 feet of this house, your children, or your husband. The rage on Chloe's face crumbled into stunned disbelief. You can't do that. You can't keep me from my own children. You did that yourself when you sent that anonymous career-destroying email to his law firm, Jessica said without blinking. When you tried to ruin their father's ability to provide for them. A judge found it to be an act of extreme cruelty and malice, and signed this order this morning. Just then a small trembling voice cut through the tense, hate-filled air. Mommy! We all looked up. Lily was standing at the top of the stairs, her small face a heartbreaking mixture of confusion and fear. Noah was hiding behind her, his small fingers clutching the back of her pajamas. They had heard the shouting. Chloe's entire demeanor shifted in an instant. The rage vanished, replaced by a syrupy sweet, manipulative tone that made my stomach turn. Lilybug. Oh baby. Mommy's home, sweetie. Come give mommy a big hug. But Lily didn't move. She just stood there, a small still figure, her eyes fixed on her mother's desperate, smiling face. She looked from Chloe to me to the strange woman in the suit, and then she asked the one question that shattered everything, the one question that no lie could ever fix. Daddy was in the hospital, Mommy, she said, her child's voice ringing with a painful, profound clarity that cut deeper than any legal document. He was really sick. Why weren't you here? The question hung in the air like a physical weight, sucking all the oxygen, all the hate, all the fight out of the room. Chloe's face, which had been contorted with a desperate, fake smile, simply crumpled. It was like watching a beautiful, ornate vase fall to the floor and shatter into 1,000 pieces. All the fire, all the righteous indignation, all the manipulative energy seemed to drain out of her at once, leaving behind a hollow, broken shell of a woman. She looked up at her 8-year-old daughter, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she seemed to realize that her actions had consequences far beyond frozen bank accounts and divorce papers. They had a face, and that face was staring down at her from the top of the stairs. I was on a trip, baby, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper, the words weak and pathetic. I couldn't get home. The phones weren't working. It was complicated. But children have a way of cutting through the tangled weeds of adult complications with the devastating simplicity of truth. Lily shook her head slowly, her expression unblinking and serious. An old soul trapped in a little girl's body. But Grandma was here, she stated, not as an accusation, but as a simple, undeniable fact that she had observed with her own 2 eyes. Grandma took care of Daddy. She slept in the chair next to his bed. And Aunt Karen took care of me and Noah. You weren't here. From the mouths of babes. It was the purest, most damning verdict imaginable. When the world had turned upside down, when her father was at his weakest, when she and her brother were at their most scared, Grandmother was here, Aunt was here, but Mother was not. It was a truth so fundamental that no excuse could ever erase it. Well, I'm here now, Chloe said. A last, desperate attempt to rally, to regain some semblance of control over a narrative that had slipped from her grasp forever. And I'm going to take you and Noah home with me. This is home, Lily said firmly, her small hand reaching back to clutch her little brother's. And Daddy needs us here. It was in that moment that I watched Chloe truly break. I could see the final realization dawn in her hollow eyes. She hadn't just lost her marriage, her money, her comfortable life. She had lost the one thing she had probably taken for granted most of all, her children's unquestioning trust and admiration. And unlike court orders and financial statements, that was something no lawyer could ever help her get back. Jessica Martinez, sensing the shift, stepped forward. Her voice, which had been sharp and professional, was now gentle but firm. Mrs. Miller, she said to Chloe, I think it would be best if you left now. The officers are waiting outside to ensure the restraining order is followed without incident. We can arrange for a third party to supervise you picking up your essential personal belongings at a later date. Chloe just stared, her mouth opening and closing but no words coming out. She looked up at her daughter, her beautiful, intelligent daughter, then at her son, who was now crying silently behind his sister's legs. She looked at the life she was being formally evicted from, a life she had systematically dismantled and thrown away for a cheap thrill and a bag full of stolen money. Defeated, humiliated, and utterly alone, she turned without another word and walked out the front door, her shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. We heard the door click shut behind her. The storm had passed, leaving a devastating silence in its wake. We had won. We had protected the family. The immediate threat was gone. But as I went upstairs to comfort my grandchildren, who were now both crying for a mother they no longer understood or recognized, I knew this was far from over. What I didn't know was that the war had just begun, and the real enemy was far more dangerous, and far more evil, than I could ever have possibly imagined. 2 weeks passed in a surreal blur of doctor's appointments, physical therapy sessions, and the quiet, emotionally exhausting work of creating a new normal for our fractured family. Michael was getting stronger every day, the color returning to his cheeks. The children, though sometimes quiet and sad, were remarkably resilient. They found comfort in the solid, predictable routine we built for them. School, homework, dinner at the table every night, and knowing that their father was home, safe, and that I wasn't going anywhere. A fragile peace, like a thin layer of ice over a deep, dark lake, had settled over us. I had started to allow myself to believe that the worst was behind us. How naive I was. I was in the garden with Lily, showing her how my grandmother had taught me to deadhead the roses to encourage new blooms, when my phone rang. It was an unknown number from a hospital exchange I didn't recognize. A prickle of unease, a cold premonition ran up my spine. I answered it. "Is this Susan Miller?" A professional, calm female voice asked. "Yes, it is." "Who's calling?" "My name is Dr. Anya Sharma. I'm a staff psychiatrist at Austin Oaks Hospital. I'm calling you today regarding your daughter-in-law, Chloe Miller." My blood ran cold. The pruning shears I was holding fell from my hand and clattered onto the stone patio with a sharp metallic sound. "Is she okay? What's happened?" My mind immediately jumped to the worst. "Ms. Miller was admitted to our psychiatric unit this morning," the doctor said, her voice even and clinical. "She was found in her hotel room by housekeeping after what appears to have been a violent assault." My mind reeled. Assault? She's physically stable now, but she's extremely distraught and is suffering from acute post-traumatic stress. She claims that she has urgent information regarding a direct and immediate threat to your son's safety, and to yours. She is refusing to speak to the police or anyone else. She says she will only speak to you. This had to be a trick. It had to be. It was another manipulation, another desperate, calculated ploy to get back into our lives, to make herself the victim. And yet, the doctor's tone was so serious, so devoid of drama, and the mention of a direct, immediate threat sent a genuine jolt of ice-cold fear through me. What if it wasn't a lie? "Mom? Are you okay? You look like you saw a ghost," Lily asked, her big blue eyes wide with a child's unfiltered concern. I forced a smile that felt like cracking glass. "I'm fine, sweetie. It's just some boring grown-up stuff. Can you do me a big favor? Go inside and ask Daddy if he wants some of that fresh squeezed lemonade we made. I need to take this call in private." Once she was safely inside, her small form disappearing behind the sliding glass door, I returned to the doctor, my voice a low, urgent whisper. "I don't understand. Why me? After everything that's happened, why would she ask for me?" "She was very specific," Dr. Sharma said. "She claims that you're the only one who will believe her, and the only one with the strength to do what needs to be done. She says that the man she was with, Trent Becker, is not who he appears to be. She says he is planning to harm your family, and she's terrified she'll be next if someone doesn't listen to her warning." My instincts, the ones that had been screaming at me for weeks, were now at war. One side screamed that this was a trap, a lie spun by a desperate narcissist. But the memory of Trent's cold, calculating voice on the phone, the memory of Diane's warning about his predatory past, a deeper, colder, more primal instinct whispered that this might be terrifyingly real. What if Chloe, in her selfish pursuit of a new life, had accidentally stumbled into a nightmare far worse than a simple affair? What if she had brought a genuine monster to our door, and was now, in her own broken way, trying to warn us? I had to know. The risk of not knowing was too great. "I'll be there in an hour," I said, my voice barely a whisper. The psychiatric ward was a place of hushed whispers, locked doors, and a profound sadness that seemed to cling to the very walls. I found Chloe in a small sterile room at the end of a long silent hallway. She was a ghost of her former self. Her arm was in a sling, a dark, ugly purple bruise was blooming on her cheek, and her eyes, usually so full of fire and defiance, were hollow and empty, haunted by a terror that looked chillingly, horribly real. "Susan," she whispered when I entered the room. "Thank you for coming. I knew you would. The doctor said you have information about a threat," I said, keeping my voice flat, refusing to show any emotion, my arms crossed over my chest like a shield. "I'm listening." She looked me dead in the eyes and fresh tears began to stream down her bruised face. "He wasn't trying to steal Michael's money," she cried, her voice cracking with a desperate, ragged sob. "He was trying to steal his life. And yours too. He's a monster, Susan. And we have to stop him." I sat down in the hard plastic chair by her bed, the scent of antiseptic and despair heavy in the air. I kept a safe distance, a barrier of mistrust between us, but my mind was racing, trying to make sense of her terrified words. "What are you talking about, Chloe? What do you mean he was trying to steal his life?" "Trent," she whispered, flinching as if the very act of saying his name caused her physical pain. "When the money was cut off, when I was trapped in Cabo with no way out, he changed. The charming, fun-loving man I thought I knew just vanished. He became someone else. Someone cold and cruel and terrifying. He was furious. Not just about the money but because his plan was ruined. His plan to run away with you and start a new life with my son's money?" I asked skeptically, my voice still laced with ice. She let out a harsh broken sound that was half sob, half laugh. It was the most honest sound I had ever heard her make. "That was never the plan, Susan. That was just the story he sold me, the fantasy he used to reel me in." She took a ragged breath and looked at me, her eyes wide and pleading for me to believe her, to see the terrible truth she was about to reveal. "Susan, Michael's heart attack, it wasn't random. It wasn't because of stress from work." The room started to spin, the white walls closing in on me. "What are you saying?" I managed to choke out, my own heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. "Trent. He used to be a research chemist. He worked for a big pharmaceutical company years ago before he was fired for unethical practices. He knows things about compounds, about how drugs interact." Her voice dropped to a barely audible, conspiratorial whisper. "For weeks he'd been giving me these custom herbal supplements to put in Michael's morning coffee. He told me they were adaptogens, things that would help him with his energy, make him less stressed, help him be a better husband." Her face crumpled with self-loathing. "I was so stupid. I believed him. But they weren't herbs." She began to sob uncontrollably now. "They were beta blockers. A specific kind. He explained it all to me in Cabo when he was bragging about how clever he was. Mixed with Michael's actual prescription blood pressure medication. He said it would create a cascade failure, a ticking time bomb in his cardiovascular system. He was inducing the heart attack, Susan. He was slowly, methodically murdering my husband. I felt the air leave my lungs in a single painful rush. It was too monstrous, too diabolical to be real. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a cold-blooded scientific execution. But the look in her eyes, the raw, unadulterated terror, it was genuine. "Why?" I choked out the word, a painful rasp. "For the life insurance? For the house?" "That was just the beginning," she said, shaking her head, her tangled hair falling across her bruised face. "That was just step one. After Michael was gone, after a few months of me playing the perfect, grieving widow, step two was you." She looked at me, and her gaze was filled with a chilling certainty. "He was going to arrange an accident for you. A fall down the stairs at your house, a tragic car crash. Something that looked natural and unavoidable for a woman your age. With you and Michael both gone, I would have had sole custody of the children and complete, uncontested control over Michael's entire estate, plus whatever you left to him in your will. We would have had everything. And no one would have ever suspected a thing." I stared at her, horrified, trying to process the sheer, calculated evil of it all. "And you went along with this?" I accused, my voice dripping with a fresh wave of disgust and disbelief. "And no," she cried, a flash of her old fire returning, a desperate plea for me to see the distinction. "I swear to you, Susan, on my children's lives, I didn't know the full extent of it until we were in Cabo. I thought he was just a handsome con man trying to get some money. I never ever thought he was a killer. When he laid it all out for me, when he started talking about you, about making my own children orphans, I told him it was over. I said I was done, that I wouldn't be a part of it. She pulled up the sleeve of her hospital gown, revealing a line of dark, ugly bruises in the shape of fingers gripping her arm. That's when he attacked me. He told me it didn't matter if I was with him or not. He said he had a new plan. He didn't need me alive to collect the money. He tried to make it look like a suicide. But there was one thing the monster hadn't counted on. Chloe, for all her moral failings, was a creature of the modern digital age. Paranoia, or maybe a tiny buried sliver of self-preservation, had made her suspicious of Trent's smooth promises for weeks before their trip. He never knew, she whispered, reaching into the drawer of her bedside table with her good hand. I was afraid of him. He was too smooth, too perfect. I started recording our conversations on my phone. Whenever he talked about our future, she pulled out the phone and handed it to me, her hand shaking so violently I was afraid she would drop it. It's all here, Susan. Hours of it. Every plan, every threat. The proof you need to put him away forever. My fingers trembled as I took the phone. I tapped the screen and pressed play on the most recent recording. The first thing I heard was Trent's cold, casual voice, completely devoid of emotion. A voice that would haunt my nightmares for the rest of my life. Once the old lady is gone, he said calmly, as if discussing the weather, everything is ours. Just be patient. These things take time to look natural. The phone felt like a lead weight in my hand, heavy with the sheer evil it contained. I didn't need to hear any more. That one sentence, spoken with the casual, detached cruelty of a monster, was enough to confirm the horrifying truth. This wasn't a desperate lie from a cornered woman trying to save her own skin. This was real. My family hadn't just been the target of a con man. We had been the targets of a cold-blooded killer. I didn't say another word to Chloe. I simply stood up, my body moving on autopilot, and walked out of the room. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, I called Jessica Martinez. My voice was shaking so badly I could barely get the words out. Get to Austin Oaks Hospital right now, I said, the words a fractured whisper. And I think you should call your friends at the FBI. We have a much bigger problem. What followed was a whirlwind that swept away the last vestiges of our normal life. Jessica arrived within the hour, her face a grim mask of professional focus. She was followed by two stern-faced FBI agents, a man and a woman, who moved with a quiet, intimidating authority. I sat in a small, private waiting room, the recorded voice of Trent Becker echoing in my head, while they went in to interview Chloe, with Jessica present as her counsel. They were in that room for hours. They listened to every second of the recordings Chloe had made. The tapes, I learned later, painted a chilling, detailed picture of a sociopathic predator who viewed murder and manipulation as a business model. He had bragged to Chloe about his methods, about his knowledge of obscure poisons and drugs, about how to make a homicide look like a tragic accident or a natural death. The FBI's computer systems began to connect the dots. Trent Becker wasn't even his real name. It was one of at least 4 aliases he had used over the past decade. He was a ghost, a professional predator who moved from state to state, leaving a trail of wealthy women who had met untimely, accidental ends. There was a widow in Florida who had died from a boating accident, leaving him her entire estate. There was a divorcee in Arizona who had slipped and fallen in her mansion's grand entryway. Chloe hadn't just uncovered a plot against our family. She had accidentally stumbled upon a prolific serial killer who specialized in profiting from death. Armed with the undeniable evidence of the recordings and Chloe's terrified, first-hand testimony, the FBI moved with breathtaking speed. They assembled a tactical team. 3 hours later, as he was sitting in his leased BMW, parked down the street from my house, presumably planning the accident that was meant to be the next step in his gruesome plan, Trent Becker was surrounded by a dozen armed federal agents. He never saw it coming. He surrendered without a fight. Special Agent Davis, the lead investigator on the case, came to meet with Michael and me at our home the next day. The relief in the house was a palpable thing, but it was heavy, tinged with the trauma of what we had survived. Your daughter-in-law, for all her other issues, he said carefully, choosing his words with diplomatic precision, saved your lives. And likely the lives of others. Without those recordings, Trent's plot would have been nearly impossible to prove. He's a professional. He's meticulous about covering his tracks. He explained that Chloe had agreed to testify against Trent and his entire network, which they were now discovering had connections to international money laundering. In exchange, she would be placed in the Federal Witness Protection Program and granted immunity from the homicide conspiracy charges. She would still have to face the music for her financial crimes, he assured us, but her sentence would be significantly reduced due to her extraordinary cooperation. What happens to her now? Michael asked, his voice quiet, his face etched with a weariness that went bone deep. He looked exhausted, as if the weight of the entire world was pressing down on his still recovering heart. She'll be placed in the Witness Protection Program immediately, for her own safety, until the trial is over, Agent Davis said. After that, it's up to her to build a new life somewhere far away from here. He looked at Michael with a rare moment of genuine sympathy. As for custody of your children, the courts will be immediately notified of the circumstances. You will be granted full and permanent custody. That is the least of your worries now. If you've stayed with my story this long, thank you so much for your patience and for being here with me. Means more than you know. If you are still watching, please just type the number 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me on this incredible, terrifying journey. That night, after the agents had left and the children were tucked safely in their beds, blissfully unaware of the bullet they had just dodged, Michael and I sat on the back porch, watching the Texas sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The world looked so peaceful, so normal, it was hard to believe the monstrous evil that had almost torn it, and us, apart. We were safe. The nightmare was finally over. But the scars I knew, both visible and invisible, would remain forever. A week later, after the initial storm of media attention had died down and our lives had begun to settle into a new quiet rhythm, a courier delivered a small flat-rate box to the house. It was addressed to me with no return address, but the label indicated it had been sent from a prestigious law firm in Houston, one I didn't recognize. My heart pounded with a familiar, unwelcome anxiety as I took the box inside and carefully sliced through the packing tape. Inside there was no letter, no lengthy explanation, no desperate plea for forgiveness. There was only a simple leather-bound bankbook for a newly opened trust account and a single folded piece of high-quality stationery. My hands, which I noticed were still prone to trembling, opened the bank book first. The account was titled, The Lily and Noah Miller Education Trust. My breath hitched in my throat. I flipped to the first page, and my eyes widened at the account balance. $70,000. Every single penny Chloe had siphoned away into that offshore account, plus an additional sum that I calculated was roughly what she had spent on her lavish trip to Cabo, had been returned. She had somehow liquidated whatever personal assets she had left in the world to make her children financially whole again. My hands were shaking as I unfolded the single piece of paper. It wasn't a letter of apology. It wasn't an attempt to excuse her inexcusable behavior. It was just a short, simple note, written in her familiar, elegant, looping script. It contained only one sentence. Tell the children that their grandmother is a warrior. Tears, hot and unexpected, streamed down my face as I read the words over and over. It wasn't absolution, and it certainly wasn't an excuse for the deep, lasting pain she had caused our family. But it was something. It was an acknowledgement. A final desperate act from a broken woman who, in the end, finally understood the one truth that mattered. That I had fought for her children, for their safety and their future when she had not. It was the closest thing to a thank you I would ever receive. I showed the note to Michael later that evening as we sat together on the porch, a comfortable silence between us. He read it, his expression unreadable in the twilight, and handed it back to me without a word. She destroyed our family, Mom, he said quietly after a long pause, his voice heavy with a sadness that would likely never fully fade. But in the end, her catastrophic betrayal is what saved our lives. If she hadn't run off with that monster, we never would have known he existed until it was too late. I don't think I'll ever be able to make sense of that. Maybe we don't have to make sense of it, I said, folding the note carefully and tucking it into my pocket. Maybe we just have to live. We just have to move forward one day at a time, and be grateful for every single sunrise we get to see. And that's what we've done. It has been a long and difficult road. There has been therapy for all of us, there have been nightmares, and there are still days when the what-ifs threaten to swallow us whole. But we are healing. Michael's heart is strong again, the children are happy and secure, and our family, though smaller and scarred, is bound together by a love that has been tested by fire and has proven to be unbreakable. I learned some hard lessons through this ordeal. I learned that evil can wear a beautiful, charming mask, and that sometimes the people you love can hurt you in ways you never thought possible. But I also learned that the love of a mother, the fierce, unyielding, primal instinct to protect her own, is a force of nature more powerful than any darkness. I'm not a warrior. I'm just a mother. And sometimes I've learned that's all you need to be. Thank you for listening to my story. I know it was a long one, but it was important for me to tell it to get it all out. The world can be a scary place, but I truly believe it's also filled with everyday heroes who don't wear capes. They are mothers, fathers, and grandparents, standing up and fighting for their families every single day. If you've ever had to fight for someone you love, if you've ever had to face down a darkness to protect your family, I would be honored to hear your story in the comments below. Please like this video and subscribe for more stories. Your voice and your story matters.